Make sure he signs it before the board meeting. Her tone was calm, protective, almost gentle. And if he hesitates, she adjusted her bracelet without looking up. He won't. They all believed she was saving him, that she stood between him and the wolves, that without her, he would crumble. But protection can look a lot like control, and control can look a lot like love. After the accident, the empire shifted. Not publicly, not officially, but quietly. Board members stopped calling him directly. Documents were routed through her. Meetings were too exhausting for him. Investors were reassured. He needs time to recover. And she stood beside him every time, steady hand on his shoulder, voice soft, gaze loyal. No one questioned the woman who never left his side. But in private, she managed everything. His medication, his schedule, who he spoke to, what he read, what he signed. You don't need the stress, she would whisper. I'll handle it. And slowly, subtly, signatures began appearing on documents he didn't fully review. Transfers, authorizations, power extensions, temporary measures. All temporary. At least that's what he believed. The first crack didn't come from betrayal. Came from a delay. One afternoon the medication shipment arrived late. He missed a dose. Just one. And for the first time in months, his mind felt clearer, his thoughts sharper. Questions formed that had been fogged before. Why had every executive meeting been postponed? Why had the CFO stopped responding directly to him? Why did every legal paper now require her countersignature? The woman who claimed to protect him had slowly placed herself between him and his own empire. And the scariest part, she never raised her voice, never showed cruelty, never appeared ambitious. She only appeared loyal. But loyalty doesn't redirect assets. Loyalty doesn't isolate a man from his advisors. Loyalty doesn't make him dependent. And now, he was beginning to notice. The rain had just started when Kang Min-Jae's convoy slowed at the intersection. Seoul's skyline shimmered in the distance, glass towers glowing against the night, but the street ahead was darker than it should have been. One traffic light flickered. A delivery truck sat at an odd angle near the curb. Min-Jae didn't look up from his phone. Zainab did. She had been quiet the entire ride, seated beside him in the back of the armored sedan. Her posture elegant, composed. But her eyes had shifted the moment they turned onto this street. Not fear. Calculation. Stop the car, she said softly. The driver hesitated. No one interrupted a scheduled route. Stop. Now. There was something in her voice. Calm but absolute. The brakes engaged. A second later the world exploded. Gunfire tore through the night from the rooftops. The windshield of the escort vehicle ahead shattered. Sparks burst against metal as bullets struck the armored sides of Min-Jae's car. His men reacted instantly, doors flying open, returning fire with brutal precision. The air filled with smoke, shouting, the metallic scent of violence. Inside the car, Min-Jae didn't flinch. He turned slowly toward Zainab. You knew. She didn't answer immediately. Outside, one of the attackers fell from a fire escape, crashing onto the pavement below. I had a feeling, she said. The route change was leaked. Only 3 people knew. Another round of gunfire rattled the vehicle, but the glass held. Min-Jae's expression didn't change, yet something in his eyes sharpened. He trusted very few people in this world. Trusted them with information, with proximity, with survival. Zainab Adeyemi sat closer to him than anyone else ever had. Within minutes it was over. The attackers were either dead or fleeing. The delivery truck burned. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Too late to matter. One of his captains approached the car, blood streaking his sleeve. It was an inside leak, he said. We'll find who. Min-Jae stepped out into the rain. Water soaked into his dark coat, but he seemed untouched by the chaos around him. His empire had survived another challenge. Because she told him to stop. He glanced back at Zainab as she exited the car, her heels landing carefully between shards of broken glass. She didn't look shaken. She looked observant, already thinking 3 moves ahead. "She saved your life," the captain muttered. Min-Jae's gaze remained on her. "No," he corrected quietly. "She protects what's mine." For the first time that night, Zainab allowed herself the faintest smile. Not of relief, but of progress. As the flames from the truck climbed higher, reflecting in her dark eyes, her phone vibrated once inside her coat pocket. Single message. Phase 1 complete. By morning, the city had already rewritten the night. News outlets called it a failed assassination attempt by a minor rival crew. Police blamed gang rivalry. Markets opened as usual. Traffic flowed. But inside the upper floor of Min-Jae's private tower, the atmosphere was colder than the rain had been. 6 captains stood around the long obsidian table, each one armed, each one loyal or claiming to be. The air carried the quiet tension of men who understood that survival inside this room depended less on strength and more on perception. Min-Jae stood at the head of the table, hands resting lightly against the polished surface. He hadn't slept. He didn't need to. Zainab stood to his right. Always to his right. The route was changed 2 hours before departure, one captain argued. Only internal clearance could override the original path. "Which means," another said carefully, "someone here spoke." Silence followed. Min-Jae didn't look at any of them. He looked forward. He was listening. Zainab stepped closer to the table, fingers brushing a thin folder she had placed there earlier. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "There were 3 encrypted messages sent from within our internal server yesterday," she said. 2 were routine. 1 was rerouted through an offshore relay. She slid a photo across the table. It stopped in front of Captain Dae-hyun. His jaw tightened. "A coincidence," he said. "Of course," Zainab replied smoothly. "And the fact that the intercepted shipment last month passed through your shipping district. Also coincidence." Min-Jae's eyes shifted slightly. Not accusing. Measuring. Dae-hyun looked toward him. "You know me." Min-Jae did. Dae-hyun had fought beside him for years. He had taken a bullet once meant for Min-Jae. Loyalty in this world was paid in blood. Zainab didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Last night's ambush required precise timing," she continued. "Someone with authority. Someone trusted." The word lingered in the air. Trusted. Min-Jae's expression hardened. Not with anger, but with disappointment. That was worse. "You're letting doubt poison you," Dae-hyun said quietly. "We built this empire together." Zainab turned slightly toward Min-Jae, lowering her voice just enough that it felt intimate. "Empires fall because kings hesitate." The room felt smaller. She didn't push further. She didn't have to. Min-Jae straightened. "Until this is resolved," he said calmly, "Captain Dae-hyun is relieved of command." Shock flickered across several faces. Dae-hyun's voice dropped. "You're making a mistake." Min-Jae didn't answer. Guards moved forward. As Dae-hyun was escorted out, his eyes locked briefly with Zainab's. She held his gaze without blinking. No triumph. No guilt. Only composure. When the doors closed, silence settled again. The remaining captains stood straighter now. Fear was an efficient teacher. Min-Jae finally looked at Zainab. "You're certain?" She met his eyes without hesitation. "Yes." He gave a single nod. In that moment, it became clear to everyone in the room. She was not just an advisor. She was the only voice he listened to. And as the meeting dissolved, Zainab allowed herself a slow breath. Another pillar removed. Another step closer to the fall. The execution was not announced. There were no speeches. No accusations read aloud. In Min-Jae's world, guilt did not require spectacle. It required certainty. Captain Dae-hyun was taken to the lower level of the harbor warehouse just before midnight. The tide was low, the air heavy with salt and oil. Outside, Cargo cranes stood like silent witnesses against the dark horizon. Inside, the room was almost bare. Concrete. A single overhead light. 4 armed men. Dae-hyun stood unrestrained. He had not begged. That alone said something. Min-Jae entered last. The guard stepped back immediately. Even here, even now, authority bent toward him. For a moment neither man spoke. They had built too much together for words to come easily. "You believe her," Dae-hyun said at last. Min-Jae's face revealed nothing. "The evidence points to you. The evidence she gave you." A quiet beat passed. Zainab stood slightly behind Min-Jae, dressed in black, composed as ever. The light caught the sharp line of her cheekbone, the calm steadiness of her gaze. Dae-hyun looked at her directly. "You've been here less than 2 years." She didn't respond. He turned back to Min-Jae. "I would have died for you." Min-Jae's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's why this disappoints me." "It's not me." The words echoed faintly in the hollow space. For the first time, something flickered in Min-Jae's eyes. Not doubt but conflict. Loyalty was the foundation of his empire. Remove it and everything became fragile. Zainab stepped forward just slightly, her voice quiet but firm. "Delay creates weakness. Others are watching." Min-Jae didn't look at her, but he heard her. Empires fall because kings hesitate. He had built his power on decisiveness, on the understanding that mercy, when misplaced, invited collapse. He walked closer to Dae-hyun until only a step separated them. "If I am wrong," Min-Jae said evenly, "history will judge me." Dae-hyun held his gaze. There was no fear in it, only resignation. "I hope it does." Min-Jae took the gun from the guard beside him. The sound was deafening in the enclosed room. Dae-hyun fell instantly, the echo of the shot lingering longer than it should have. No one moved for several seconds. Min-Jae lowered the weapon slowly. His breathing remained steady, but something intangible had shifted, a fracture too fine to see. He handed the gun back and turned away. "Dispose of it," he said. "Not him." As he walked toward the exit, Zainab followed at a measured pace. She did not look back at the body on the floor. She did not need to. Outside, the ocean wind was colder. Min-Jae paused briefly near the water's edge, staring out at the dark horizon. He had removed a threat, protected his empire, protected what was his. Behind him, Zainab's phone vibrated softly inside her coat pocket. She didn't check it. She already knew what it would say. "Trust is collapsing." And for the first time, as Min-Jae stood alone against the vast Black Sea, the empire felt just slightly quieter. The execution should have restored order. Instead, it created silence. Not the disciplined silence Min-Jae commanded in a room, but the kind that spread through corridors and lingered in lowered gazes. Conversations stopped when he entered. Reports became shorter, answers more careful. Fear kept men obedient. It did not keep them unified. Within a week, 2 warehouses on the southern docks were raided by authorities. The warrants were precise, storage codes correct, shipment dates accurate to the hour. Information that only inner circle captains possessed. Min-Jae read the report without expression. Across the city, a rival syndicate known as the Black Viper began reclaiming territories that had once belonged to him. Clubs switched allegiance overnight. Protection payments were redirected. A gambling ring that had operated under Min-Jae's name for years suddenly displayed a different emblem at its entrance. No war had been declared, yet ground was being lost. In the executive war room overlooking the skyline, screens flickered with maps and financial projections. Red markers appeared where influence had weakened. Zainab stood beside the central display, one hand lightly resting on the table. "They're moving quickly," she said. "Faster than expected." Min-Jae watched the shifting territory lines in silence. "They don't move without confidence," he replied. "Confidence comes from information." Another captain stepped forward, voice tight. "We eliminated the leak." "Did we?" The question hung unspoken. Zainab tapped a key. A new projection appeared. Financial flows routed through shell companies in Macau and Singapore. Funds that had once circled through Min-Jae's network were now being redirected. "They're not just attacking physically," she said. "They're absorbing your revenue streams. Or, not ours." The subtle distinction passed unnoticed by most. Min-Jae folded his hands behind his back. "And who leads Black Viper now?" "Officially, no one," the captain answered. "Unofficially, rumors say a new strategist. Someone calculating." Zainab's eyes remained on the screen. "Then we respond strategically." He turned slightly toward her. "How?" "Consolidate power. Tighten loyalty. Remove hesitation." The captain shifted uncomfortably. "More removals will create panic." "Panic can be controlled," Zainab said evenly. "Weakness cannot." Min-Jae studied her profile. The calm certainty, the steady breathing. She never appeared rattled. Even now, as influence slipped quietly through his fingers, she stood composed. Outside the tower windows, the city lights glittered as if nothing had changed. But something had. Later that night, alone in his office, Min-Jae reviewed a private intelligence file. 3 minor operations had failed in the past month, each one planned after Daehyun's death. He replayed timelines in his mind. The execution had been decisive, necessary. And yet, since that moment, the empire had begun to thin at its edges. Behind him, the office door opened softly. Zainab entered without announcement. "You're still awake," she observed. He didn't look away from the window. "So are you." She walked closer, stopping just behind him. "Empires survive storms by cutting away rot. And if the rot was never there?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. Brief pause. "Then the storm would not be this precise," she replied gently. He nodded once. Outside, in a district that had once belonged solely to him, the Black Viper insignia was raised over another building. No gunfire. No explosions. Just quiet replacement. The cracks were no longer invisible. The shipment was supposed to arrive before dawn. No digital trail. No official port entry. Just coordinates, timing and silence. Min-Jae had arranged it personally. A consignment of precision rifles and ammunition routed through international waters before docking at a private pier east of the city. Only 4 people knew the exact arrival window. Min-Jae, the logistics chief, the dock commander, and Zainab. At 4:17 a.m. His secure line rang. He answered without greeting. "There's nothing here," the dock commander said, voice strained. "No vessel. No signal. It never reached the checkpoint buoy." Min-Jae's eyes lifted slowly from the dark horizon outside his window. "Check again." "We did. Coastline is clear." And a hesitation. Black Viper units were seen 2 miles south an hour ago. The line went silent. Min-Jae ended the call and remained still for several seconds. The sky beyond the glass was turning a faint gray, the city unaware that power had just shifted again. By sunrise, confirmation arrived. The shipment had not vanished. It had been seized. Black Viper forces intercepted the cargo mid-transfer with surgical precision. No firefight. No casualties. The transport crew had surrendered immediately, as if they were expecting it. In the war room, tension coiled tight. The logistics chief swore under his breath. They knew the coordinates. The dock commander shook his head. That route was changed last night. Last minute. Min-Jae stood at the head of the table, listening. Zainab's expression remained unreadable. She studied the maritime map projected before them, fingers resting lightly at her side. "Who transmitted the final coordinates?" Min-Jae asked. "I did," the logistics chief answered. "Encrypted channel." "Who had access?" "Was only the inner circle." Silence thickened. For the first time, suspicion did not explode outward. It narrowed inward. Min-Jae dismissed the others with a quiet gesture. The room emptied, leaving only him and Zainab beneath the low hum of the screens. She walked closer to the table, gaze steady. "This isn't random," she said. "They're not reacting. They're anticipating." He studied her carefully now. Not as an ally but as a variable. "You think there's another leak," he said. "I think," she replied softly, "that someone is always one step ahead." Her eyes met his without hesitation. Too steady. Min-Jae moved to the window again, watching the city fully wake. Traffic began to crawl along the highways. Markets opened. Ordinary people stepped into ordinary mornings. Meanwhile, somewhere along the coast, his weapons now strengthened the enemy who was carving into his territory. A memory surfaced uninvited. Daehyun's final words. "It's not me." Min-Jae closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "Review all internal communications," he ordered. "No assumptions." Zainab inclined her head. "Of course." As she turned to leave the room, her phone vibrated softly in her hand. She didn't look at it immediately. She already understood what it meant. Another pillar removed. Another fracture deepened. Behind her, Min-Jae remained by the glass, staring at his reflection layered over the city. For the first time, doubt did not feel distant. It felt close enough to breathe. Min-Jae did not sleep that night. He replayed timelines instead. Every leak, every intercepted route, every decision that had narrowed his circle until only a handful remained. Patterns existed in chaos. He had built his empire on finding them. And now the pattern pointed somewhere he did not want to look. By morning, his expression revealed nothing. He summoned only Zainab to the private strategy lounge above the main office. A room without cameras, without staff, without witnesses. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooked the river cutting through the city like a silver blade. She entered composed, dressed in charcoal gray. Hair pulled back with deliberate precision. "You asked for me." Min-Jae poured 2 glasses of tea himself. Small gesture. Intimate. Trusting. "I've made a decision," he said calmly. "We're moving the remaining weapons stock." Her eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly. "Where?" "To Busan. Temporary storage. Underground facility beneath the old freight terminal." The location did not exist. He handed her the glass. Their fingers brushed briefly. "It leaves tomorrow at midnight," he continued. "Only you and I know." She held his gaze as she sipped. No visible reaction. No hesitation. "That's wise," she said. "If Black Viper expects us to fortify the city, they won't anticipate relocation." He nodded once, studying the rhythm of her breathing, the steadiness in her shoulders. She was flawless in control. "Prepare the transfer logistics," he added. Quietly. "Of course." She left the room with measured steps. Min-Jae remained still for several seconds after the door closed. Then he picked up his secure phone. "Deploy observers to the Busan freight terminal," he instructed. "Full perimeter. No visible presence. Report only." He ended the call and turned back toward the glass. If she was loyal, nothing would happen. If she wasn't, he did not finish the thought. The following night, rain returned to the city. At 11:48 p.m., one of his observers called. "Black Viper units are assembling near Busan Terminal," the voice whispered. "Heavy presence. They're waiting." Min-Jae closed his eyes briefly. The location had been fiction. There was nothing there to intercept, which meant only one thing had traveled south. Information. He dismissed the guards and stood alone in his office, the skyline glowing beyond him. The confirmation did not bring anger. It brought stillness. A slow, controlled realization settling into place. Minutes later, Zainab entered without being summoned. "Everything is proceeding," she said smoothly. "No irregularities." He studied her face carefully now, searching not for guilt but for intention. "Good," he replied. Their eyes locked. 2 strategists standing on opposite sides of an invisible board. She believed she was still ahead. He now knew she was playing. Neither acknowledged the shift. Outside, far from the city, Black Viper soldiers waited in an empty freight yard beneath cold warehouse lights. And in the quiet space between Min-Jae and Zainab, something fundamental had changed. Trust had not shattered, had calcified into strategy. By dawn, the confirmation was undeniable. Black Viper had mobilized an entire tactical unit to the abandoned freight terminal in Busan. Surveillance footage showed armed vehicles circling empty loading docks, men positioned along rooftops, drones scanning a warehouse that contained nothing but dust and broken pallets. They had come prepared for war. For weapons that did not exist. Min-Jae watched the live feed in silence. The glow of the screens reflected faintly in his eyes, sharpening them into something colder than anger. Across the room, his captains shifted uneasily. They committed resources, one of them muttered. That wasn't a guess. That was certainty. Yes, Min-Jae replied quietly. It was. He dismissed them all with a single motion. When the room emptied, the quiet felt heavier than gunfire. Zainab entered moments later, summoned but unhurried. She walked with the same controlled elegance, as if nothing in the world had tilted. You wanted to see me. He gestured toward the central screen. The footage replayed. Black Viper forces sweeping through shadows. Command signals flashing between units. A sniper adjusting position atop a water tower. Waiting. For nothing. Zainab watched carefully, her expression unreadable. They're expanding aggressively, she observed. Desperation can make enemies reckless. Reckless, Min-Jae repeated. He stepped closer to her, not threatening but deliberate. This operation was coordinated within 6 hours of our discussion. She met his gaze evenly. Intelligence moves quickly. It moves where it's sent. A quiet beat passed between them. The air changed. No accusation. No raised voices. Just the slow tightening of truth around both of them. If there is another leak, she said calmly, we eliminate it. Min-Jae studied her face, searching for the smallest fracture. A flicker of guilt. Tremor of fear. There was none. Only steadiness. He turned away first. I agree. He walked to the window, looking out at the city that still carried his name in whispers. Behind him, Zainab's phone vibrated once inside her coat pocket. She did not reach for it. She already knew the message would confirm what she had hoped. Phase 6 successful. He suspects nothing. But as she stood there, watching Min-Jae's reflection in the glass, something unsettled her. He was too calm. No rage. No swift retaliation order. No execution command. Just silence. Strategic silence. Continue monitoring Black Viper, he said without turning. Let them waste resources. Yes, she replied softly. Their reflections overlapped faintly in the glass, king and protector side by side, neither revealing the truth forming beneath the surface. When she left the room, Min-Jae remained still for a long time. Confirmation had not brought satisfaction. It had brought clarity. The enemy was no longer outside the empire. The enemy stood within reach. And the most dangerous part was not that she had betrayed him. It was that she had done it flawlessly. Now, the next morning nothing appeared different. Meetings proceeded on schedule. Reports were delivered. Orders were signed. Zainab stood at Min-Jae's right as she always had, composed and attentive, offering strategic adjustments in a voice smooth enough to calm storms. If anyone in the room sensed the fracture between them, they were wise enough not to show it. Min-Jae listened to her speak about territory consolidation, about reallocating security teams to create the illusion of retreat before a counterstrike. Her analysis was sharp, precise. He had always admired that about her. Now he measured it. When the captains were dismissed, she remained behind. You're unusually quiet, she observed gently. Am I? His tone carried no edge. You usually challenge my projections. He stepped closer to the table, glancing over the map she had arranged. I'm learning to trust your instincts. The faintest pause. Good, she said. Their eyes met and held. Neither blinked first. The room felt smaller, as though the walls were listening. Later that evening, Min-Jae invited her to dinner in the private penthouse above the tower. An uncommon gesture. Intimate. Intentional. The city stretched beneath them in gold and shadow. Table set for two. No guards inside. She accepted the glass of wine he offered, her movements unhurried. To resilience, she said lightly. To loyalty, he replied. The word hovered between them like smoke. She smiled, controlled, elegant. You doubt me. I doubt everyone. That's not true. He tilted his head slightly. Enlighten me. You never doubted me. Silence followed. He studied her face carefully, the calm intelligence in her eyes, the composure that had never cracked under pressure. She had walked through gunfire beside him, stood beside him during executions, whispered strategy in his ear while his empire trembled. If betrayal were an art, she practiced it beautifully. Trust, he said quietly, is a currency more fragile than power. And more valuable, she answered. Outside, distant thunder rolled across the skyline. He stepped closer, close enough to see the subtle shift in her breathing. If I discovered someone close to me was feeding information to Black Viper, what do you think I would do? Her expression did not change. I think, she replied softly, you would make an example of them. And if that person believed they were justified, justification doesn't prevent consequence. Their proximity now carried weight. Not romantic, not tender. Calculated. She held his gaze without flinching. He reached past her to retrieve a file from the table behind, brushing her shoulder deliberately. A test within a test. Her pulse did not visibly change. He moved away first. Tomorrow, he said evenly, we finalize our counteroffensive. She inclined her head. I'll prepare everything. When she left the penthouse, her composure remained intact. Only once inside the elevator did her reflection betray the faintest tightening of her jaw. He was closer to the truth. But not close enough. Above the city, Min-Jae stood alone by the window once more. The silent war between them had begun, and neither intended to lose. The night arrived without ceremony. No thunder, no gunfire, just a stillness that felt deliberate. Min-Jae's counteroffensive meeting was scheduled for 11 p.m. All senior captains were summoned to the underground strategy chamber, the same room where loyalty had once been questioned and blood had once been spilled. Zainab entered beside him, poised as ever, a tablet in her hand containing what she believed were the final positioning orders. Above ground, Black Viper units were already mobilizing. She had ensured that. Inside the chamber, the captains stood waiting, armed, silent. Min-Jae took his place at the head of the long table. Tonight, he began calmly, we end this. Zainab activated the central display. A map appeared. Routes, timed movements, defensive withdrawals designed to lure Black Viper into a controlled trap. Except the routes were different. Her fingers paused mid-motion. This wasn't the file she had transmitted. Min-Jae watched her carefully. The coordinates changed, she said smoothly, masking the flicker in her eyes. This isn't the final draft. It is, he replied. A quiet ripple moved through the room. She turned toward him fully now. What are you doing? Correcting an imbalance. The screens shifted again. New footage appeared. Surveillance from Busan. From the harbor. From encrypted message relays. Timestamps. Transfers. Patterns. Proof. The room felt colder. You tested me, she said softly. Yes. No anger in his voice. No triumph. Just certainty. The captains glanced between them, realization dawning. Black Viper's mobilization outside had been anticipated. Redirected. Ambushed by Min-Jae's hidden units hours earlier. Their forces were already collapsing. The empire had not fallen. It had tightened. You built this carefully, he continued. removing my captains, isolating me, feeding them confidence. Her composure held, but barely. You destroyed my father, she said at last. The words were not shouted. They were delivered like a verdict. Years earlier, Min-Jae's expansion into West African trade routes had dismantled a financial syndicate. Collateral damage. Necessary consolidation. You never even knew his name, she added. Silence pressed in. This was revenge, he said. Yes. The admission echoed more powerfully than any gunshot. One captain stepped forward, weapon half raised, awaiting command. Min-Jae did not look away from her. You stood beside me, he said quietly. Through everything. I needed you to trust me. And did you? He asked. A flicker, brief, dangerous, crossed her expression. That was not part of the plan. Outside, distant sirens signaled the end of Black Viper's failed assault. Min-Jae inhaled slowly. You had your chance to destroy me, he said. You chose to play slowly. I wanted you to understand what it feels like to lose control. Their eyes locked one final time, not as king and advisor, not as enemies, but as two strategists who had nearly undone each other. He turned to his guards. Stand down. Shock moved through the room. She leaves tonight, he continued. Alive. And never returns. Zainab did not argue. Exile was mercy. As she walked past him, she paused briefly. For what it's worth, she said quietly, you were not the monster I expected. And you, he replied, were not the weakness I feared. She left without looking back. Above the city, the empire stood intact. But something within it, within him, had shifted permanently. Trust had fallen. And in its place stood something colder. Wisdom.